Today, we're going to be looking at the structure of Congress, and this obviously goes along with what we just did yesterday with Federalist 51, the ideas of Montesquieu, and separating the powers of government into three different branches. So, we're going to take a look here today at Congress. Of course, Congress meets at the U.S. Capitol building. Those of you who were fortunate to maybe go on your eighth grade field trip to DC, probably spent some time here at the Capitol. What an amazing uh, building it is with the the dome there, of course, Lady Liberty there on top, overlooking the land, and of course the legislative branch makes the laws. Okay, and so the laws we talk about, a lot of times we focus on the president, but those laws are coming from Congress. And so just keep that in mind. The founders' intentions of Congress. They wanted Congress to be, the legislative branch, to be the strongest branch. And notice there's a question mark. Maybe you could argue that, but if you look at the list here, you'll see that yes, the legislative branch is very powerful. Notice your checks. You got three there over the executive branch, over the president, and two over the judicial branch, and of course the executive branch there too. Appropriation power. The president can suggest what we should do with our money as a nation and have a budget, but it's Congress who sets the annual budget every year for our nation, and they vote on it. And of course, uh, it a lot of times when it comes to August, September, October, that time of year, you hear about it in the news quite a bit because they are getting ready to vote for the budget coming up in the following year. They also have the confirmation power. The president can choose, let's say, Supreme Court justices, but it's the legislative branch, in this case the Senate, who has to confirm and approve of that justice. Also, the executive, the president, can sit down and write a treaty with other nations, but again, the Senate has to approve it. Great example of this was after World War One. President Wilson wanted his 14 points enacted. He wanted to create a League of Nations, and he signs the Treaty of Versailles, and the Senate rejects it. And we, the United States, we never signed the Treaty of Versailles to end World War One. Instead, 2 years later, in 1921, we actually signed our own peace treaty with Germany. Okay, and then of course you have the powers over the judiciary, um, through the amendment process. And so maybe the Supreme Court rules on a certain issue, and the legislative branch, along with the states, say, we don't agree with that, and so we add to the Constitution. Now, obviously, we have not added much to the Constitution since it was created. Since the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments were added in 1791, we've only had 17 additional changes for a total of 27. But really, if you look even closer, two of those cancel out with prohibition. So technically, we've only made 15 changes. So yes, the legislative branch can do this over the Supreme Court, but it's very unlikely. And then finally, they do have the power of impeachment and removal of executive and judiciary members. So, are they the strongest branch? Again, debatable, but as you can see here, they do have a lot of power. You have your bicameral balance. Bi meaning two, cameral meaning house, so two houses. Here in the United States, our federal government does have the two houses, the House and the Senate, and 49 of the 50 states have bicameral legislatures. Only one state does not. The state of Nebraska is unicameral, it's only one house, but 49 out of the 50, and then, of course, our national legislative branch has two houses. The House, of course, is proportional. You might recall from seventh grade civics, eighth grade U.S. history, etc., You might recall the old argument between the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan, which led to the Great Compromise. And what you see here is really the results of the Great Compromise. The House is proportional based on the population. Um, it is more connected to the people. The representatives are able to be in their congressional districts uh, on a regular basis and have contact with people to find out what are the people thinking, what are the issues they care about, etc. And as a result, they only serve 2 years in the House. And they often act as the delegates or the voice of the people. And that's why also sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the People's House. Then you have the Senate, equal representation from each state. Of course, each state has 2 senators. 50 states, 2 senators, we have 100. Now, if we do add a state, then of course that would go up to 102. With this, you have 6-year terms. Now, what is not on this slide, which I wish it would be, is the Senate is known as a continuous body. Unlike the House, every 2 years, which uh, it's every even year, in the House, we elect all 435 members of the House. Not so in the Senate. Instead, we call it continuous because what we do is we divide it by thirds. So, one election, we will vote for 33 senators, unless, of course, there's a death and you have special elections there. But overall, usually you have 33 senators. 2 years later, you vote for the next 33, and then 2 years after that, the 34. The reasoning for that is our founders thought that, yes, the House is the part that the people can relate to very easily, but the Senate, they wanted a more stable body. And by only having a third voted in, you don't have this major upheaval every election for the Senate. So, and that's why it's very difficult a lot of times for the Senate to change parties because you're only voting for a third. And that way you do have a more stable uh, upper house in Congress. And as you can see, they act as the trustees for our nation. They're called the voice of reason. They're looking for what is best. With 6-year terms, they really don't have to worry about reelection as often. And I mean, if you look at this, House is 2, the president is 4 years, the Senate is 6. So obviously, they have a little bit more job security than the president and the members of the House. Constitutional powers for Congress. Article 1, Section 8. So when you sit down to that AP exam and you get thrown a question about Congress, a lot of times, more than likely, it's going to have to do with Article 1, Section 8. Article 1, Section 8 lays out the powers of Congress to lay and collect taxes. Yeah, we do a pretty good job at that. We also do a pretty good job at the next one, to borrow money, to regulate commerce, interstate and foreign. So Congress regulates the trade between states and then also with other countries. They establish the rules for naturalization. What are the rules for immigrants coming into our country to become citizens of the United States? It is Congress that has the power to coin money. How much money do we print? That is decided by Congress, and of course, in today's time, with the help of the Federal Reserve. Also, Congress has the right to create courts as they see fit, except the Supreme Court. But any other federal court, Congress is the one who creates it. Many people think, oh, the president declares war. Well, that is not true. It is Congress. So, that's why, if you want to get really, really technical, that's why Vietnam was never considered a war. It was considered a police action or a military conflict. The United States never officially declared war in Vietnam. Congress wouldn't do it. And that's why, and of course, that's my father's generation. That's why my father's generation had a very difficult time winning in Vietnam. And eventually, of course, we do end up pulling out and Saigon fell. It's because Congress would not officially declare war, and therefore our soldiers did not have the capabilities to win Vietnam. Um, now, don't get me wrong. There were cases where they went against it, where we were offensive, but for the most part, the rule was you couldn't shoot unless you were shot at. And so, again, Congress did not declare war. It is not the president; it's Congress. And therefore, that leads to the last one, to raise and support an army and navy. Congress is the one who basically says, all right, this is how much we're going to spend on the military. All right, so the evolution of powers. You have the oversight of the budget. And of course, this can restrict the federal budget prepared by the president. The president can say, hey, I want this much money this year. And Congress can say, nope, we're going to do something different. Appropriations goes along with the oversight. They're the ones who set the amount of money made. Okay. Investigation. Congress can launch all kinds of investigations. Investigations into Watergate with Nixon, the Clinton Lewinsky. And of course, one I really remember in the 1990s was steroids in baseball, when they had Jose Canseco and Barry Bonds and them testify before Congress about steroids in baseball. And so they can investigate all kinds of things. Right now, of course, we're seeing some investigations with big tech. That's why, if you've been paying attention to news, you have Google and Twitter and Facebook, the leaders of those constantly having to report to Congress and testify before Congress. Then you have the Elastic Clause, which, of course, extends congressional powers. Again, our founding fathers knew in 1787, when they sat down to write the Constitution, which the father of the Constitution was James Madison. When Madison sat down and wrote most of the Constitution, they knew there was no way they would be able to create the laws we need for today's time, hundreds of years later. So they put in the Elastic Clause to allow Congress the power to make laws as needed. Here you can see some of your congressional powers I just mentioned. And notice this whole thing, expressed. Expressed means it's in the Constitution. And you can see the different clauses. But then there's also implied. So, for example, lay and collect taxes. It's not specific, but it is implied that they can have taxes to help public schools, welfare programs, etc. To borrow money, it's implied to be able to maintain the Federal Reserve Board. Okay, so again, implied powers versus expressed. Expressed is right there. It's in black and white in the Constitution. Implied, you're reading between the lines. Same thing with commerce powers. It says regulate foreign and interstate commerce. So therefore, it's implied that they have the power to prohibit discrimination in restaurants, hotels, etc. Okay, so again, the difference between expressed and implied. And that's continued here with some of these other powers that are given to Congress. So over here's the expressed, here's the implied, and you can see these different clauses in parts of the Constitution here on the left, and then what's implied. So the difference between the two houses, and you do have differences. I'm going to go ahead and go to this next one. The House has 435 members. They do serve 2 years. To be a member of the House, you have to be a citizen of the United States for 7 years. So yes, that does mean you can be foreign born, naturalized, and then run for office. And you must be at least 25 years old. And there are strict debate rules. A lot of times when you're in the House, you are only allowed 5 minutes when you're debating. In the House, they're the ones who have to initiate impeachment. So we've had 4 impeachments in our history, and they all start in the House. Okay? And it's also the House that initiates the revenue or tax bills. That's why sometimes they refer to the House as the house with the purse. The House has control of our money. And of course, the House picks the president if no one wins the Electoral College. And we've had that happen a few times in our history. We can think of the election of 1800 when Thomas Jefferson wins by 1 vote in the House after 36 votes. In 1824, uh, Andrew Jackson won most of the votes, but not enough to win, so it goes to the House, and the House did not like Andrew Jackson, so they chose John Quincy Adams. So we've had cases where, of course, and then, of course, you have the famous 1877 compromise, which ended Reconstruction. So, anyway, we've had cases where the House has had to change or choose the president. On the other side, in the other house, we have the Senate, much smaller, 100 members. 6-year terms. You have to be a citizen of the United States for 9 years, and of course, at least 30 years old. They have loose debate rules, things like the filibuster, where they can just talk and talk and talk and talk. Literally, if you've ever seen the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, that's what that's about. You can literally take the Washington, D.C. phone book, get up, and just start reading names and numbers, and just keep. And the whole idea there is to keep talking to where they say, okay, enough, we won't vote on this. And they move on. So, a lot different than the House rules. If the House does impeach a president, it's the Senate who tries the president or members of the judicial branch, and they have to have a 2/3 vote. We've had 4 impeachments in our history, but not one president has been removed. It's also the Senate who approves the presidential appointments, and I've already alluded to earlier, it's the Senate that approves treaties. Is our representative government unconstitutional? Well, there was an act passed in the 1920s where we limited the House of Representatives. Honestly, I'm glad we did. If you look at this, the size of our country.
Good Friday morning, Panthers.
Sorry about that. So we're back. I'm glad they passed this act in the 1920s because if you look at that, if we were basing it on population, we'd have over 10,000 U.S. representatives. So instead, we limit it to 435 instead of per 10,000. Okay, and you can see how over time it kept growing because we kept adding states, we kept getting bigger as a nation, and finally in 1924 we said, okay, let's set it at 435, no matter if we add states or not. And you got to remember, here in the 50s we added 2 states with Alaska and Hawaii, and so, but it stays the same. And that's why there's a debate right now about adding Puerto Rico or Washington, D.C. Who's going to give up their seats? States don't want to give up their seats. And so that's why the debate continues and why it takes so long. All right. Now, I'm just going to breeze through this next part because this is outdated information. The 115th Congress, you can see from 2017. Now, by the way, when they number the Congress, it's based on the terms of the House. So how many terms have we had with the House? So that's how that is set up. And you can see here the breakdown. You can see the 109th Congress, 2005, 2006. Some things that went on. This is not uncommon in the House. You can see this here. Again, this is older. Who represents us? Yes, Marco Rubio, which he's going to be up for re-election here soon. And this one's changed. That's why I'm saying this is older. This, of course, is now Rick Scott. And then, of course, our representative here is now is not DeSantis. Of course, DeSantis is now our governor. Instead, it should be Walz. So anyway, you can sort of see only one has stayed the same so far. So, and then you've got Rick Scott and Walz here. And of course, DeSantis is our governor. Here you have your leadership, House of Representatives. You have the Speaker of the House, the most powerful position in the House, and then how it breaks down. We've already talked about the whip, making sure that your members of your party are doing what you want them to do. And then over here in the Senate, you have the same kind of setup. And I think I'm going to skip that. Here we go. How much does members of Congress get paid? They get paid $174,000 a year with health care and pensions, but that's not counting all the other book deals and speaker fees and all kinds of other ways they make money. That's just what they make for being in their position. Okay? And then here, if you want to take a quick look at this as we continue to look at the three branches, here you can see the checks and balances on each branch. And then you have finally the War Powers Act. This is our last slide. The president must consult Congress if possible before sending troops in. If the president sends troops in, he must notify Congress within 48 hours of doing so. And then you can see the rules. If troops were sent in and they were not, and Congress does not declare war, notice the president can only keep them there in that country for 90 days, and then they got to be pulled. And we've had many cases of that. In the 90s, Bill Clinton sending troops into Sarajevo. We've had President Obama sending troops into Libya, etc. So you've got all kinds of examples of the 90 days. And that ends our notes for the structure of Congress. Please be sure to do the assignment that is going to be posted with this, and then please complete the quiz. Thank you for listening and taking notes.